Welcome to the Dr. Carolyn Coker-Ross Show, awakening your full potential and expanding your understanding of how to live fully and joyfully by making conscious choices that promote and maintain vitality in all areas of your life. Now here's your host, Dr. Carolyn Coker-Ross. Please be sure to listen to this episode in an environment that is safe. Do not listen to this recording while driving a car or operating any kind of machinery.
Welcome to The Vital Life. I'm your host, Dr. Carolyn Coker-Ross, and today we're going to be talking about a very important subject. This is about a book called Kids Beyond Limits, and my special guest is Anat Baniel. She was born in Israel and trained by the legendary Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais. She has established an international reputation for her work with children with special needs. Anat is a clinical psychologist who has refined her method for more than 30 years and runs the Anat Baniel Method facility in Marin County, California, which draws students and clients from around the world. She is also the author of a new book called Move into Life. You can find out more about her books and her work at www.anatbanielmethod.com. So welcome to the show, Anat.
Thank you for having me, Carolyn.
So, yes.
Or Dr. Ross. How do you want to call?
No, please call me Carolyn.
Okay.
I think your book is absolutely amazing, Kids Beyond Limits. And in the book, you're talking about the kind of work that you do with children who have autism, Asperger's, brain damage, attention deficit, and other types of developmental delays. What drew you to working with special needs children?
Actually, initially I didn't even intend to work with them, but I write about it in my first chapter. I encountered a child with special needs while traveling and assisting Dr. Feldenkrais. I was very, very young, and he was a lot older. And he observed how I was with that child, and he started referring kids to me. And then it grew very, very quickly. There was something about connecting with those kids and seeing them transform in small and big ways that, the parents started asking for my work, and I just did it until we are here today.
It sounds like it was serendipitous that you had that experience with the little girl named Elizabeth that you talk about in your book.
Yes, it was quite remarkable because she had an extremely grim prognosis of global brain damage, and at those days the parents were to put her in a
like
facility.
A home. Yeah.
Yeah, in a facility away from home because she was never going to do anything, talk or walk or anything like that. And she looked like that. I mean, there was very little she could do. She was crying all the time. Her eyes were crossed. She couldn't roll over. You couldn't put her on her belly. Even when she was a year old, she screamed. But what transpired is that from the very, very quickly she started changing. And one of the things, Carolyn, that I realized early on that I think was very lucky, there were two very lucky things. One was that I realized it's really about the brain. And it's somehow about recruiting the child's brain to be able to do its own job better. And the other one is that I had no training in how to work with children. So I had no preconceived ideas of what's possible and what's not possible. So I just went for seeing changes and learning. All I was wanting to see was some learning, some change, because once there is learning, I knew that there would be progress.
And you worked with her for a number of years, correct?
I worked with her over a period of 20 years.
Okay.
In the beginning, very intense. When she was little, she was 13 months old when we started with her. And quickly, pretty soon, Dr. Feldenkrais got ill, and he couldn't work with her anymore. And then not too long afterwards, he passed away. So I worked with her a lot in the beginning, and then as she could do more, I kept working with her, but not as frequently. And then by the time she was a teenager, they would come out to California maybe, twice to three times a year, maybe for 3-4 days. So it was kind of like specific issues did a few lessons, she'd get through them, and then live her life. And she went to a regular school. By the time she was school age, I estimated that she would be able to handle a regular classroom, which she did. And it wasn't like she was perfect, but she was strong enough cognitively and physically to do it. And today she has 2 master's degrees from very esteemed universities. She's married, and she has her own business.
Wow. So that comes from the prognosis being that she should be put into a facility for disabled children to now being a really fully functioning adult, it sounds like.
Absolutely. And a beautiful one. She's bright. We email when it's needed. I got her permission for the chapter in the book. She made some suggestions. When I started working with her, I wasn't using email at the time, right? So we couldn't have even envisioned something like that. But it's quite remarkable. And
well,
the good news,
also you mentioned that you trained with Moshe Feldenkrais. So, how long did you work with him, and what are some of the principles of his method?
I studied and worked with him over a period of 11 years. I started doing his work as a child through my dance teacher. The principles that I talk about now, Caroline, I've taken everything I've learned from him, and he was just a remarkable genius, and I was beyond, lucky, and I've profound gratitude to having had a chance to study with a man of his caliber and his foresight. The principles I describe now are really how they've evolved for me over the years, and they're more my definition now in the Anat Baniel Method. So what I'm going to be speaking to is actually my principles, the 9 essentials.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about the difference between what he was doing and what you evolved into doing.
Unless somebody knows the two, are you familiar with the work, with the Feldenkrais work?
I am a little bit, but I'd like for you, that's what I was hoping you could let our listeners know about, because there are still Feldenkrais practitioners around.
Oh, yeah, there are definitely Feldenkrais practitioners and doing great work, and, there are Feldenkrais trainings. It's a totally, existing, wonderful thing. If, with your permission, I would love to speak as to what I do rather than compare, especially if I think the listener doesn't know either one.
Okay. Well, let's go on to talk about a little bit more about what you do. But first, I wanted to ask you a question about, I mentioned in your intro that you work with kids who've been diagnosed with a wide range of disorders, autism, Asperger's, and so on. And in your book, you speak of many of these cases and how they, just like we talked about the little girl Elizabeth, and how they've actually gone on to lead, many of them, pretty normal lives. Does this mean that their original diagnosis was incorrect, or how do you view that?
I believe that almost always the original diagnosis is actually correct. Mm-hmm. So Elizabeth, eventually, when they did an MRI later on, they found that she has a condition called cerebellar hypoplasia, and it's a structural deformity, and she's missing a good percentage of her cerebellum. And kids with that degree of this condition and the way she presented when she was a year old do end up being oftentimes really profoundly disabled, both physically, they don't get to stand, walk, talk, or cognitively too. So, and a lot of the children that are, have a stroke or have cerebral palsy, of course, the diagnosis is accurate. Where the breakthrough is from my point of view, is that they still have a potentially extremely, what I call brilliant, a good brain that can become a brilliant learner. Mm-hmm. In other words, the difficulty is real, the diagnosis is real. However, very often, if you start doing with a child what is needed for that brain to be able to kind of correct course, it grows new connections and it grows new possibilities, and certain areas in the brain take over and form the patterns that are needed. But it doesn't happen on its own. So because the brain sort of depends on its own experience for its future development. So if you have a baby that doesn't move, it's spastic, it's in pain, it's not doing the usual random movements and all kinds of different experiences a healthy child has, the brain simply is lacking the information with which to work.
Wow.
And trying to make the child that which it should be doing is very often a losing proposition, because if the child could, they would. It's really a question of providing the brain with the information it's missing because of the condition, the disease, the injury, the brain damage, whatever it may be.
Okay. I think that's a profound shift in looking at how those children are usually treated. And I think you explain it a little more in detail in your book, where you talk about how traditional, like physical therapy is often prescribed for children with, especially with spasticity and so on. But that is kind of like trying to get them to do something that their brain really doesn't know how to do. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So let's go into your method. I just have to say, I hope your book is being read by, millions of parents who have children with these disorders, because it gives a degree of really profound hope that there could be change for children such as these. But let's talk about your 9 steps that you have in the Anat Baniel Method. In the first step, movement with attention, you refer to Daniel Siegel's work at University of California in Los Angeles and mindfulness. Can you say a little bit more about how mindfulness feeds into what you do with children in that first step?
Absolutely. And to begin with, I would like to mention that without movement, nothing happens. Einstein said it perfectly. He said nothing happens until something moves. And that movement, and people say, physical movement versus the mind, but thinking is a form of movement, and emotions are definitely a form of movement. But movement is life, and movement is what I labeled or called the language of the brain. Movement is the opportunity for the brain to get information and to self-organize. That means create connections and patterns, and then manage and control the body and the emotions and the thoughts and so on. So the brain goes through an apprenticeship process. The baby is born pretty much with no voluntary action at birth for humans. So, and it takes a long time, it takes a good 20, today even longer, sometimes 25 years for a child to become more or less an adult. Now, but movement alone, and that's what's so important, is not enough. Brain research shows that when you take, in this case it was monkeys, and you get them to move, but you distract them, and there is no change in the mapping in the area that was moving. So you get them to move a finger, but they move it, but nothing changes. So you can think like about automatic exercising, or it's an equivalent. But if the other group of the monkeys, you get them to pay attention to the part, the finger as it moves, and there is very quick changes in the maps. That means that area gets more and more connection. And what I found in my work is that, first of all, I need to move the children, because if they don't move, not much is going to happen. But I do it in a way that gets the child's attention to him or herself. It's not attention to me. It's not attention to a task, but it's attention to what they feel as they move. And that's where you read the stories. That's where the miracles starts happening very often, within minutes. I mean, people can go Google my name, Anat Baniel, on YouTube, and Google Devora and see how a paralyzed arm from brachial plexus injury, she was 8 weeks old, she could never move it. At this age, it's random movements, but it never moved. In 6 minutes, it starts moving. And you can see how you can get an 8 weeks old attention while you move them a day old. You can attention because we are built to feel ourselves. I know you are a therapist, and we are built to feel ourselves. If we don't feel ourselves, we don't know anything.
We don't even know we exist if we don't feel ourselves, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's where the mindfulness kind of crosses over into what you do.
Yeah, and I prefer to call it attention because I'll tell you why, for the parents or therapists who might be listening to this. Mindfulness is a very general description of a whole kind of approach and practices. Attention, from my point of view, is an action. It's something we do. We attend to something. We feel it. We notice that something is going on or whatnot in ourselves. And to get a baby to be mindful, I wouldn't know how to do. I really wouldn't. But to get a child to really closely pay attention to what they feel, I know how to do that, and I can teach others how to do that, and I have. And this week, just a very quick example.
I'm talking with my special guest, Anat Baniel, who has an international reputation for her work with children with special needs. Her book is Kids Beyond Limits. That's the book we're talking about today. She also has another book called Move Into Life, which I believe is about adults. So, Anat, before we went to break, you were going to give us a wonderful case that illustrated how you use attention in your work, getting kids to pay attention.
Yes, and I very often like to tell stories that are very recent. So this week I saw for the first time, actually I share the work with some of my colleagues, but I saw a little boy by the name of Brooks, 4 years old, with pretty profound autism. He doesn't speak, and he falls a lot, and he stares into space, and all that kind of stuff. Very sweet child. And it was obvious that he was pretty afraid, so the mother sat close by, and I started working with him. And first of all, I want to say that my observation working with children on the autism spectrum, that pretty much every single child that I worked with that diagnosis has actually real issues with the motor coordination and the motor management of the brain. I mean, the brain, there are real issues there. And he too, so even though he walks and he does everything, he's not moving well, and he's afraid to transition and so on. And I don't know what he expected because it was his first session with me, but he was obviously fearful. So I went very, very slow and touched him, and that comes in also the other essentials. And I realized that his legs, his hips are very tight. He holds them, and gradually I pointed to his knees and gradually facilitated by moving the pelvis, the chest. There's a whole way of doing it for the knees to start, his side set, to pick them up a little bit, eventually tilt them to the other side. And the child was just transfixed. It's almost like, and I know it's hard to grasp initially because, the child is there, they're walking, they have legs there. You think they know they have legs.
Yeah.
But they don't really get it that they're there. They don't really feel themselves in any clear way. It's very blurry for them. It's very undifferentiated. Differentiation is a huge concept in my work. So what happens is that he came back yesterday, after the first session, and the mother told me that something very interesting happened, that she observed the child looking at his knees at home and moving them and imitating what I did with him.
Wow. So suddenly he realized he had knees.
And he initiated experimenting and exploring the movements and the sensations. The depth of his inner experience manifested in that, but I nobody asked him to do it, and nobody exercised him. So when you bring the child, to pay attention to themselves, the transformations that can happen both on the physical and the cognitive and the emotional social level can be quite surprising. Now, that doesn't mean that the kid is quote unquote cured. I mean, he actually will need a lot of work, I believe, for a number of months to transition him into more of what we would call typically developing child. But he's certainly a powerful learner, and he hasn't been that so much.
Don't you think I don't know how to put this, but I always find it so amazing how the human body has such a capacity to do what it's supposed to do when it's given the right tools,
Absolutely. It is quite remarkable, and it's so much so, Carolyn, that when I work, I don't try, and I talk about that a lot in the book, that I don't try to make the kids ever what they can't do. On the opposite, if I feel that it's hard for the child or they can't do it, I back off. Mm-hmm. Because I know what happens in the brain when you try to get yourself to do what you can't. A lot of things you don't want to have. You learn a lot of things you don't want, and you develop patterns that get in the way later. But at the same time, when I work and, we do the other essentials like variations and slow and reducing the effort and flexible goals and all that stuff, it floods the brain with information. So the first organ that's obviously does self-rights itself is the brain. I can't get into the brain and yank it around, and if anybody did, it's always a bad news, right? So,
yeah, right.
So we really depend on the system, on the brain, to redirect itself, to organize itself better, to literally upgrade the quality with which it works. And that's what we are after, rather than try to impose specific performance on the child.
Yeah, it's really working with the child where they are right now and moving them forward from there rather than trying to impose a certain set of goals on them.
Absolutely.
So what's interesting to me also, though, is because you're talking about movement, and I want to get into the other 9 steps a little bit, the other 8 steps a little bit, but I'm wondering how you see the movement effect, or what's been your experience of how the movement work affects their actual cognitive function. I mean, in the case of Elizabeth that you said, it sounds like she, cognitively really is pretty normal. What about someone with autism, many of whom have very high intellect but can't express themselves, or someone with other brain issues? Do you see that movement work helping them cognitively too and behaviorally?
Tremendously. And I'm going to make here a pretty bold statement. Movement is at the heart, the way I speak about movement, not movement as exercise where you do 5 times the arms up and 5 times the arms down. Even that can be useful, but movement in its richest, most full form that's where cognitive organization and evolution comes from. I watch those little babies that can't move, and then all of a sudden something starts moving, and you can see their eyes, and they feel it, and then they look, and they start making connections between that movement and that outcome and their feeling and where mommy is. This is how cognition is actually formed. People think that movement is separate from cognition.
Yeah.
But it's the source of the evolution of cognition, a movement also in the sense that you feel and you sense stuff and you get outcome as you move. I mean, if you just move your head as you're sitting, I assume you're sitting right now, just move your head a little to the right and a little to the left and feel how the weight shifts more to one hip and then to the other hip, I mean, the brain has to manage all of that all the time. It's extremely complex. So that's another kid with the ADD that I also started working this week. And all the children with attention deficit disorder or the ADHD, also early on, I observed something that I have found to be so the rest of the time, which is, you get a child with ADHD. They walk, they jump, they talk. They're just a little bit off the wall, so to speak. They're agitated, and they are having a hard time, let's say, learning to read or write or math. So so the first time I got a kid like that, I thought, oh, they're moving. What can I do for them, right? They're already moving.
Right.
And I put the child on my table, and I started moving their back. I described it, I think, also in the book. I started moving their back, and I realized that the back moves like one block. That means there's very little differentiation. So they learned how to stand and walk, but it's organized with it's not as refined. It's not as complex. The brain of the human being it develops to become more and more complex, not complicated, but complex. That means it has a lot of freedom to connect in very many different ways. So that's what presented to me. So I started working on this boy. He was about 6 years old, and I very quickly, the ribs started moving differently in relation to the spine and the hips and so on. So first of all, he started breathing better. He was moving more smoothly, the whole thing. And the mother came back and said, I think it was after a couple lessons or one or two, I'm not sure. And the mother came back and said, his teachers are saying that he's doing a lot better in class, and they didn't know that he was coming to me after 2 sessions. And what I understood, and that's it's not a simple concept, but in order to write and understand what you're reading, or in order to have some mathematical thinking and understanding, it requires a certain level of complexity of differentiation in the brain. It's not by chance that a child that is 4 months old is not going to learn to read and write, even though some people try to make them do it, which is a big mistake. Or they're not going to do math, even though they start getting some mathematical idea in terms of quantities. Research shows that. But to really understand numbers, we need more complexity. I got the kid to have more complexity on what people would call the physical level, but he was able to translate. That means the brain became a more skillful brain, so he could then understand numbers better.
Is it a sort of immaturity of the brain then that you saw with him? You can call it immaturity in the sense that over time, when the process is successful, the brain continues differentiating extremely quickly and creates, the child is born with about 22% of the size in terms of connections and numbers of, the complexity of the brain, the size of the brain. Only a fifth. And we get 4/5 by the age of 3. So there is a huge amount of growth, but it's not just mechanical growth of more connections. It's the relationships between the different connections. That's what actually gets the brain to grow. It's the formation of the connections through experience. And when a child, for some reason, whatever it is that I have no idea, doesn't allow it to happen fully, you're trying to work with insufficient information and freedom. So when the movement is back to your original question, movement is the most fundamental, across the board way to communicate with the brain and to get it to grow and become a more mature, evolved, complex, refined system that can do many things. Do you think certain movement systems that are very attention-focused help children? I'm just thinking about things like Taekwondo or, Pilates, where they really, you really focus on, the movement of your ribs or, specific hand movements, that kind of thing. Do you think that's helpful then to help develop the brain?
The general answer is absolutely yes. I would differentiate a little bit Taekwondo from Pilates for children or judo. And again, it depends how it's taught. But
that's absolutely true. I mean, I think in the traditional way. Yeah.
Martial arts are fantastic mechanism. The kids I work with, when I first get their brain to work better, because otherwise they feel beaten up and they feel stupid, or it's a very bad idea to put them in another failing situation.
Absolutely.
But once I can see that they can figure out, feel their bodies and understand movement instructions and know what, connect words to their own body and movements better, I highly recommend, and I found a number of teachers in different cities, not in all of them at this point, but that work with children, also children with special needs, with martial arts, and that they teach it with some of the principles that I work with, the essentials. And those kids, one of the first one was actually a friend of mine that I did studied with him some martial arts years ago, and he would get kids that couldn't learn, had trouble reading, writing, and the way he taught them, within a couple, 3 months, they were out of their problems. Very, very powerful, if taught according to the 9 essentials, more or less, so that the brain can use it as a source of new information rather than more inhibition and more failure.
Yeah, or more rigidity, because some of the martial art, because I have a black belt in Taekwondo, and wow. I learned from someone who is like generations in Korea, who had done it from his teacher, from their teacher, and so on and so forth. So it was very traditionally taught. And what I liked most about it was that aspect of attention, that, if you didn't pay attention, you would very easily get hurt. And that, the refinement of the movements wasn't about repetitively, which is how a lot of American teachers teach you, like do 100 roundhouse kicks and do them now. It was really about tweaking that kick with your attention to make sure that the position was correct and so on.
You were very lucky to have such a teacher, I tell you.
I know.
And you see what you said about those 100 repetitions. You do 100 repetitions when you really like how you're doing it already.
That's exactly right.
Because what repetitions do, they also, the brain can change. It's what people call now brain plasticity. But people assume that plasticity is only in the positive direction, but plasticity can go also in the negative direction. That means when you do a lot of repetitions, the brain does not create new connections. It grooves in deeper and deeper the existing patterns, and it actually gives up on a lot of connections that it doesn't deem necessary anymore. That means you actually get more and more,
you get more and more good at doing the bad thing or doing it the bad way. Exactly.
So if you're a pianist or you're taekwondo or whatever it is, but what you described, the refinement, and then there are ways to accelerate this process hugely by, for instance, the essential variations.
My guest today is Anat Baniel. She's the author of Kids Beyond Limits and her newer book for adults called Move into Life. Her website is www.anat, A-N-A-T, Baniel, B-A-N-I-E-L, method.com. So, Anat, we're going to have you back because I have so many questions, but let's talk a little bit more about your method. You've highlighted the attentional movement. You've talked a little bit about variation, and I think by default about the slow. What are some of the other key points that you want us to know about in your 9 steps?
Yeah. Well, about slow, I'll just say very quick. Fast, we can only do what we already know.
Okay.
So if we want to do anything new, and I'm sure in your martial art, when you wanted to refine stuff, you slowed way down.
Absolutely.
Right? You can't do fast and know what's going on. You can only, the brain just hijacks it into the deeper grooved patterns. So anytime you want a change in your child or in yourself, you need to slow yourself down, slow your child down, and then the brain immediately pays attention to what's going on and change starts happening. Variation, I just want to say one thing about it, is one can call it intentional mistakes or playfulness. So when you get the child, because that floods the brain with information. So instead of saying it the right way, if you think about speech therapy and you try to drill the child to say the right thing, you get them to do a lot of different things until the brain can perceive differences. And once it perceives differences, it has the information to work with. So, and by the way, when the brain gets the information it needs, the research shows estimated 1.8 million new connections per second.
Wow.
100 million new connections a minute. So the essentials really drive brain change, positive brain change, in a very, very powerful way. We're going to post the YouTube, we haven't done it yet, of Dr. Michael Merzenich, who's a famed, neuroscientist, talking about why he supports Kids Beyond Limits and the work, because he says it does drive positive brain change. Now, the fourth essential is subtlety. It's the reduction of force. Again, when we do things with a lot of force, we lessen our sensitivity, and we don't feel as well, find differences in what we do, and then the brain gets starved of new information. So it's all about creating the conditions for the brain to be flooded with sensations and information it can work with. So anytime emotional force, cognitive force, like trying to force the kid to think something or believe something, or a physical force, or effort. I mean, if the kid has to make great efforts, for instance, to try and stand up, they're never going to learn to stand well, guaranteed. Yeah. So we have to really always create conditions where it's really easy. And that's very hard for Westerners to do because we're so drilled into no pain, no gain. And if you're not trying hard, it's almost like morally something's wrong with you.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah.
But for the brain, it's the opposite. If it's really easy and safe, it goes like, oh, I can do that. And then it's open to doing more, and that's what turns, by the way, the learning switch on. And that's the next essential, I don't know if it's in order, but it's like, again, research, scientific, I'm very interested, of course, in the research, shows that the brain can either be in a learning mode or not. And when the child's brain is not in the learning mode, it doesn't matter what you do, they're not going to learn. They're just going to get entrenched and maybe somewhat traumatized emotionally or something like that, but they're not going to learn. So you need to, and I talk about it in the book, I won't go into details, to how to recognize and how to create conditions where the child is actually learning. Otherwise, don't waste your time and don't, torture the kid. And flexible goals, of course, it's more for the parent than the child, but it's the healthy kids don't have goals. The most successful development in babies, they don't lie on their back and say, oh, when am I going to roll on my belly? That's my next developmental stage. They are really busy moving and feeling and exploring, and their brain is growing like there's no tomorrow. And all of a sudden, a combination of the movements they've already figured out sum up or integrate into, the first time, by the way, unintentionally, they roll on the belly. Always, the new thing a kid does is always surprise for them the first time. Mm-hmm. The third time, it's intentional. Two times, usually, it's surprise, and then they figure out what's going on, and then they can do it on purpose. So again, work with the kid where they are, and just look for learning. Don't get rigid about what the outcome should be, because we can't control the outcome. We can only help define the process. So here, this book is about the quality of process you're creating for your child and for yourself.
Okay,
and then I'll just
now that you're bringing up the parents, I wanted to just find out, how are parents involved in your work? How do you work with the parents?
Okay, so now that we have the book, the parents are reading it, and they really read it and reread it, and they just change even how they change diapers, or how they feed the child, or how they talk to the child, or the way they play with the child, or what kind of therapy they will or won't do for the child, or what they ask their therapist how to be with their child. Mm-hmm. So it's a huge influence across the board. And also, many parents feel relieved because the approach in this book really gets you to, first of all, connect to your child, have the permission to love your child as they are right now, and not feel all the time, not focus on just what's wrong. A few days ago, I got an email from a mother that is actually a piano teacher, and her daughter has some issues. And she was like thanking us, for writing the book, because she said her daughter is like 4 or 5 years old. She said it's the very first time since her daughter was born that she actually realized that the daughter has enormous amount of wonderful things that she's doing and the way she is, and she never seen it because she was so focused on the trouble. Mm-hmm. And she said that alone just changed her life, the mother's life. But the daughter is responding to it because the emotions the energy travels from one to the other.
Right, and and that kind of relationship is the most healing thing you can do for any person, no matter what.
And you know it from your work.
Yeah.
That if you create a hostile environment towards your client, they're not going to thrive, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. But with a child, not even hostile, it's just the anxiety, and the kids know, once they can talk, they say they're stupid, they feel something is really wrong with them. Mm-hmm. And that's, for me, probably the most debilitating aspect of it all. Because when people feel that they're whole, and they're well, and then on top of that they learn and develop, then they can have a wonderful life.
Yeah, no matter
even
what
if
their
they
limitations.
Are in a wheelchair sometimes, because know, you're a therapist. People can be walking and tangoing and jumping and having all the movement and look gorgeous, and inside they feel bad about themselves, and life is really hard.
Yeah.
So this book go ahead.
I wanted to know, is this a book that all parents should read, or is it, is there any benefit to healthy kids for parents to read this book?
Absolutely. Just yesterday, someone said to me she really wants to bring this book in Berkeley to a whole, the school district and so on, because it transcends. You see, the brain is the brain is the brain. And those principles support positive brain growth and development for all brains. For veterans that come back from the war in Iraq, it supports the human brain has the unique quality. All mammal brains can change, but none as much as the human brain, and none depend on brain change and learning as much as human beings. Mm-hmm. So we're built to learn and change our brain throughout life. That's how we thrive. And so if you do those principles with healthy children, they'll just get brighter and smarter, and it'll take them less time to learn and less, drilling, reading, writing, math, whatever it is, and they'll be a lot happier and healthier. And it's also, this book, in the end, the child can't do the essentials without the parent doing the essentials, right? The parent has to do them in order for the child to be in the essentials, in those 9 steps. So parents also begin evolving and growing and maturing into being more enlightened parents. And that doesn't mean they were not good parents before. But as human beings, we are called upon to always continue growing and evolving in order to thrive.
Yeah. So you mentioned veterans. Have you had any experience working with people with traumatic brain injury? And has this been successful in that arena? I would expect it would be.
The answer is a definite yes, and I actually started doing that when I was still living in Israel.
Okay.
It's a lot of that, and we got raised the funds I'm going to be doing research on introducing my work. We're going to do a pilot study with Dr. Michael Merzenich specifically on traumatic brain injury. So definitely the answer is yes. And, of course, a lot of the babies have traumatic brain injuries, stroke or lack of oxygen or any other kind of brain injury, sure.
Mm-hmm. What about the effect on mood? Because there is a lot of research, for example, on depression and how physical activity is the best treatment for depression. Have you had any experience working with people with severe mood disorders or mental illness, and whether or not that changes with your work?
I have. I don't know if you know, but my background is clinical psychology. So that's what the population I started with when I was very inexperienced. But definitely not a huge amount. That has not been a focus specifically with extreme mental disorders. But I've had a fair amount of that, and I work a lot with adults. I train them, and I can say from my own personal experience, it has a very profound impact on my own emotional life. That's why I know how powerful it can be. And before I did this work, I was a dancer too, and dance was very important for me, but it didn't ever have the same effect as doing this work, because it's a much more drives brain change. And with the children, the most common response that we get from parents initially, and then of course it continues, is my child is so much happier. I've heard that this past week from all the new clients, and the kid I told the story about with the autism, She said he really loves coming here. And we have people who flew in from Hong Kong with a child with severe cerebral palsy who screamed and cried. They do pretty old-fashioned physical therapy, pretty tyrannical, and the child really, really suffered and actually regressed. And she says the parents can't believe. I mean, he's actually calm. He was sleeping in fetal position as a result of this really rigid therapy he got. It's very unfortunate. And now he's sleeping, on his back with his arms wide open, and he's now yesterday slept on his belly. It transformed his whole being. I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
Well, I wanted to make sure that everybody knows kind of how to access what you're doing. There's the book, which is Kids Beyond Limits, and your other book, Move into Life. How would someone who is looking to delve more into this find a practitioner of the Anat Baniel Method?
Well, by going to my website, anatbanielmethod.com, there is a section on the homepage called Find a Practitioner. And by now we have about, I think, 200, 250 practitioners that have been trained to work with children and in the Anat Baniel Method. And I recommend for any parent first to buy the book. On Amazon, it's came in trade book, so I'm so happy because it's inexpensive.
Yeah. And it's a very good read for people who are thinking, I can't read that. It's all about the brain. It's too complicated. It's really not. And Anat gives you lots of examples that I think really illustrate and inspire more than anything. It's a very inspiring book.
Thank you. And also, they can go to my website. They don't even have to buy the book. They can download the first couple chapters to see if they like it before they commit to more, because parents are so busy and exhausted, and here are so many things they should do. And watch the YouTube. You can see my work and other practitioners' work online. Okay. And see if it appeals to you. And if you do get the book, I know parents who actually practice each essential for a week and implement it, and I give examples in the book ways you could implement it in your daily life in the different conditions and ages. So and then if it appeals to the parent, then email our center or call and we also have a lot of people coming to the center for what we call an intensive. They bring the kid for a week and get 2 lessons a day for the child, and you for sure know within anywhere between 2 for certainly 5 days if that's something that you want to continue doing for your child.
And your center is located in Marin County, right?
Which is just north of San Francisco.
Right. Okay. Well, I just want to thank you so much for being on the show, and I've learned a lot from reading your book, and I'm going to read it again and send it to everybody I know, especially
thank you so much.
Yeah, especially those who have young children, because I just think this is so important, and it may help us to turn around this tide of children who are being put on, heavy-duty medications and all sorts of other things that may or may not be helping. So I'm very excited about your work. And just as a reminder, her book is Kids Beyond Limits. You can find out more about her at her website, www.anatbanielmethod.com. So thanks for being on the show, and I'm sorry to say that's all the time we have today. I want to thank all of my listeners to The Vital Life, Awakening Your Full Potential. I'm your host, Dr. Carolyn Coker-Ross, and I'll talk to you next week. Until then.
You have been listening to the Dr. Carolyn Coker-Ross Show. Please visit CarolynRossMD.com. That's CarolynRossMD.com to access podcasts, show archives, and more about Dr. Ross and her services.